Well folks, Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill has passed. A piece of legislation grandly titled the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a name that sounds less like serious policy and more like a prize from a game show, has just squeezed its way through the U.S. House of Representatives. The vote was incredibly tight, a nail-biter at 215 to 214, which tells you how split Congress was. This legislative behemoth, championed by President Trump, has passed through the Senate. The bill includes many different things we should all be aware of, and things we should not ignore. Republican leaders, with Speaker Mike Johnson at the helm, are apparently aiming for a rather patriotic deadline. They want this bill, all 1,000-plus pages of it, signed, sealed, and delivered to Trump's desk by July 4, 2025. Nothing says Happy Independence Day quite like a massive overhaul of national tax and spending policy, right? To get even this far, the bill underwent dozens of last-minute amendments. This frantic flurry of changes was an attempt to bring together the moderate wing and the more hard-line conservative elements of the party. It's like trying to get a cat, a dog, and a particularly stubborn badger to agree on dinner plans. Good luck with that. So what exactly is this One Big Beautiful Bill Act? Well, it's a sprawling piece of work, touching on everything from your taxes to national defense, and from border security to social safety nets. Think of it as a legislative buffet, but instead of delicious tiny quiches, you get potentially sweeping changes to how the country spends its money and who benefits from it. President Trump himself has hailed it as arguably the most significant piece of legislation in U.S. history, which is quite a statement. It certainly underscores his continuing and frankly rather powerful influence over the Republican Party, even now in 2025. The core of this bill revolves around a few key themes. First, there are significant tax provisions, including making those 2017 tax cuts a permanent fixture of our lives. Then, there's a hefty increase in spending, particularly on defense and border security areas frequently highlighted by Trump. And, as is often the case when a government tries to balance its books, or at least appear to, there are also substantial spending cuts proposed for various social programs. This sets the stage for a major debate about the nation's priorities and who ultimately pays the price or reaps the rewards of such sweeping changes. The implications are, to put it mildly, enormous. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the tax changes, because this is where many Americans will feel the most immediate impact, for better or worse. A central pillar of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is the proposed permanent extension of Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. You might remember those cuts. They were initially temporary and set to expire. Making them permanent means that the lower tax rates for corporations and many individuals would continue indefinitely. Supporters will tell you this encourages investment and economic growth. Critics, however, will point out that these cuts disproportionately benefited wealthier individuals and corporations, contributing to a growing national debt, which we'll get to. But wait, there's more for your wallet, potentially. The bill also aims to completely eliminate federal taxes on tips. Yes, you heard that right. For service industry workers, this could be a significant boost to their take-home pay. Imagine a world where every dollar a customer leaves as a gratuity goes straight into your pocket untaxed. Alongside this, the bill proposes to eliminate taxes on overtime pay. This is another measure clearly aimed at appealing to working-class voters. Furthermore, there's an increase in the cap on state and local tax deductions, raising it from $10,000 to $40,000 for taxpayers earning less than $500,000 annually, a popular move in high-tax states. And for our senior citizens, there's a little something too. The bill includes a provision for a higher tax deduction specifically for seniors, though this particular perk is slated to last for 4 years. It's a targeted measure, perhaps acknowledging the financial pressures faced by older Americans on fixed incomes. These tax proposals, taken together, represent a significant shift in how the government collects revenue. The overarching philosophy seems to be putting more money back into the pockets of certain groups of taxpayers, with the hope that this will stimulate economic activity or at the very least, win some political goodwill from those who benefit directly. The promise of lower taxes is always an attractive one. No one enjoys writing that check to Uncle Sam more than they have to. However, these tax cuts don't exist in a vacuum. They have consequences for the government's overall revenue, and that, in turn, affects spending decisions and the national debt. The elimination of taxes on tips and overtime, while sounding great for individuals, means less money flowing into the federal coffers. The increase in the SALT deduction cap also reduces federal revenue. It's a complex equation, and the full impact will depend on how these changes interact with the spending side of the ledger, which is where things get even more interesting. Now let's talk about where the money is going, because this bill isn't just about cutting taxes, it's also about spending, and spending big in certain areas. First up, there's a significant, and I mean increase in defense spending. While the exact figures are still being crunched by analysts, the intent is clear: a more muscular military budget. This aligns perfectly with former President Trump's consistent calls for a stronger military. Part of this increased defense allocation includes a rather futuristic-sounding project, $25 billion for the construction of a Golden Dome defense system over the United States. Yes, a Golden Dome. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie or perhaps a very expensive hat for the entire country. Alongside the boost for traditional defense, there's a massive focus on border security and immigration enforcement. The bill includes increased funding for general border security measures and, controversially, for mass deportations. To support these efforts, there are planned pay raises for immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol agents. This is clearly designed to bolster the ranks and morale of those on the front lines of immigration control. Furthermore, there's new funding earmarked specifically for ICE operations, signaling an intensification of interior enforcement activities, which is bound to be a contentious point for many communities and civil liberties advocates. The spending on border-related issues doesn't stop there. The bill also allocates a cool $12 billion to reimburse states for the costs they incurred in countering what the bill's proponents describe as former Biden administration's border policies. This is a direct nod to states, often Republican-led, that have taken their own measures to address border security, sometimes clashing with federal approaches. It's essentially a financial thank you and an encouragement to continue such efforts. This targeted spending highlights the deep political divisions surrounding immigration and border control, with this bill firmly planting its flag on one side of the debate, emphasizing a more aggressive and state-supported approach. These spending increases, particularly in defense with projects like the Golden Dome, and the substantial investment in border security and immigration enforcement, represent a clear prioritization. The administration and its supporters argue these are vital for national security and sovereignty. However, these multi-billion-dollar commitments also add to the overall cost of the bill. When you combine these spending hikes with the previously discussed tax cuts, the question of how it all gets paid for becomes even more pressing. And that, my friends, leads us to the less glamorous side of the equation: the spending cuts in other areas and the impact on the nation's finances. So, if taxes are being cut and spending is increasing in some areas, where does the money come from? Well, that's where the cuts part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act rears its head, and it's pretty significant. Major reductions are proposed for government healthcare programs, including Medicaid. Democrats have already sounded the alarm, warning that these cuts could lead to the closure of hospitals and nursing homes, particularly in vulnerable communities. The bill also imposes work requirements for able-bodied Medicaid recipients by the end of 2026, a move that is always controversial, and shifts more cost-sharing burdens onto states that expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, potentially straining state budgets. The cuts don't stop at healthcare. Federal food aid, specifically the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is slated for an approximate 20% reduction. This is a substantial cut to a program that helps millions of Americans put food on the table. Similar to Medicaid, the bill introduces cost-sharing burdens on states for SNAP, and increases work requirements for able-bodied Americans to qualify for food stamps. Additionally, there's a ban on federal funding for transgender adults' medical care, a socially conservative measure tucked into this broad economic bill. And, in a significant policy reversal from the previous administration, the bill rolls back green energy tax credits that were part of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, signaling a shift away from incentivizing renewable energy. Now, let's talk about the financial fallout. According to one estimate cited by the BBC, this bill could add a staggering $5.2 trillion to the U.S. debt. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office offers a slightly less apocalyptic but still very large figure, estimating it will add $2.3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. The bill is also expected to increase the budget deficit by about $600 billion in the next fiscal year alone. Considering the current US debt already stands at a jaw-dropping $36 trillion with a $1.9 trillion deficit as of May 2025, these are not small numbers. The market reaction has been somewhat mixed, with Treasury bond yields rising, indicating nervousness about future debt. Politically, as you can imagine, the reactions are starkly divided. Republicans, like Speaker Mike Johnson, are hailing it as generational, nation-shaping legislation. Representative August Pfluger emphasized its alignment with Trump's America First agenda. Trump himself praised House GOP leadership and urged the Senate to pass it quickly. Democrats, on the other hand, are fiercely opposed, labeling it the GOP tax scam 2.0. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries criticized it for heavily favoring the wealthy, while cutting critical programs for working families and failing to address the high cost of living. To be clear, there are several key provisions for working-class Americans. 1. Tax exemptions on tips and overtime pay. The bill proposes eliminating federal income taxes on tips and overtime wages for workers earning under $160,000 annually, provided these earnings are reported on W-2 forms. This change aims to increase take-home pay for service industry and hourly workers. 2. Increased child tax credit. Families would see the child tax credit rise to $2,500 through 2028, up from the current $2,000, offering additional financial support to households with children. 3. Auto loan interest deduction. A new provision allows for a $10,000 tax credit on the purchase of American-made vehicles, potentially reducing the financial burden of car ownership for working families. 4. MAGA accounts for children. The bill introduces money accounts for growth and investment for children born during Trump's second term, intended to assist with future expenses like education or housing. And 5. Enhanced standard deduction. The standard deduction would increase to $32,000 for joint filers, simplifying tax filing and potentially lowering taxable income for many families. So the bill is here. Let us know what you think in the comments.